Ah, they got you too, huh? Well, since you're here, welcome to the Paddy Wagon. Us two Irish American buddies drink, bullshit, discuss fun topics, and sometimes have an interesting guest such as yourself to talk with. So pull that flat cap back on, grab a drink, and have a seat. This is the Paddy Wagon.
Welcome into the Paddy Wagon. Today on the show, we have trauma therapist and clinical educator Sara Eldridge. Sara specializes in ADHD and neurodiversity. She is originally from Washington, D.C., and now resides in New York City. Sara, welcome to the show. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Great. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, so I am a New York transplant. I have been here for about 15 years, so I feel like that almost qualifies me as a native. I'm going to claim that. And I'm a licensed clinical social worker. So I got my master's in social work back in 2015 and started my social work career working in the fields of domestic violence. I did that for about 6 years. And then in 2021, I left that to join a group practice where I'm now a therapist and I work with adults. And then you also mentioned I'm a clinical educator. So I work with a nonprofit and I go talk to schools and I talk to kids and teachers and parents about, mental health and sort of challenging the stigmas around mental health and getting treatment. So that's a little bit about me professionally, and then just a little about me personally when I am not being a therapist. I really love to go to the theater. I'm very fortunate to live in New York, so I can go to, Broadway shows and off-Broadway shows and all that, so I really enjoy
any show
that.
you want to see is in New York, right?
Yeah, basically, exactly. It's one of my big arguments for why we can never move out of the city. So that's my sort of like indulgence that I enjoy, and that's that. And I like to read a lot, so I'm always reading. I'm always recommending books to clients and friends and all that. So.
Nice.
But I have a few questions for you based off of that. So
absolutely.
One, my wife and I are getting ready to go to New York in a couple months, and we have been looking and trying to decide what Broadway show or shows we're going to go to. So what do you recommend for us?
Oh, that's a great question. So really, there's a whole lot out and it really depends what your vibe is. Like, do you have a genre that you really like or?
Oh God, that's hard to say. So I went when I was to New York when I was like 14 and I saw Wicked and I loved Wicked. Wicked is so good.
Mm-hmm.
I would say like not in the vibe of like Cats.
I was going to say, you seem like a Cats guy.
No, God, no, that theme's terrible.
Oh my God.
Obviously, like the recording on Netflix of Hamilton that I've seen is super good. Haven't seen a real thing. I'm sure it's so much better live.
It is pretty good.
So, I mean, I don't know how to describe it more than her.
Okay.
How about this?
I don't know.
How about this? What is good? What is something that it doesn't matter? Just you go there, you see a phenomenal show. The acting's fantastic. The music is great.
What is your favorite?
What's your favorite?
Well, I've really enjoyed Merrily We Roll Along, which is a Stephen Sondheim revival. I'm a huge Stephen Sondheim fan. I could probably speak for like 3 hours on the psychological themes in Stephen Sondheim musicals. But so that's very good. It's got Daniel Radcliffe. So for, Harry Potter fans, he's actually pretty good in it, I have to say. So I really enjoyed that. There's also a dance musical out based on the Sufjan Stevens album, Illinois, called Illinois. And that's really good, actually. If you like dance at all, or you really like that album, I think it did a really beautiful job of taking these themes from this really complex and evocative album. And I wasn't even this huge fan of his before. And then using dance to really tell this story about like trauma and coming of age and grief and love. So those are two things that I really enjoyed recently. I'm really looking forward to Cabaret also. I'm seeing that in a couple of weeks. So I've heard that's pretty good. So
awesome.
Yeah, I'm excited about
that.
And you might really like Cabaret because they if you like Wicked and like that spectacle, like they redid the theater to like look like the Kit Kat Club and everything. So it's a very immersive experience from what I've heard. So.
All right. I have to check that out.
Wow,
I'll have to look at some of those.
I am so not cultured. Like, I'm listening to you two talk and I'm like, wait, you're telling me that you got all that from a guy doing a fucking backflip? Like, she's like, yeah, weren't you paying attention to what was being said in the mood? And I'm like, no, I didn't get any of that. I just thought the guy was a good dancer. Wow.
Totally. We're all different, right? Different art resonates with different people. If I see like a painting, I'm going to be like, I don't know what's happening there. It's a bunch of colors, right?
That's me. I'm just like,
that's me.
I'm like, I like straight lines and I like stuff where people just spin a canvas and splash paint at it because it's random every time. There's no form to it. And he hates it.
No.
But that to me is neat because it's unique. And it's so dumb.
That's
and it's
my
so
wife's
simple.
thing. She loves the modern art, the all that, like the splash paint and all that stuff. I'm like, I don't. It's just paint.
But here's the thing:
it's just colors. I don't.
It's got to be the right colors. If there's, I don't like purples for some reason. I'm just not a big purple person. Other than some of the plants in the landscaping, but I like the purples. But like it's muted. Light grays and it's like
look at the way the paint is splattered and the mood that is saying the artist he was in that moment and the colors he used say this. But I'm like,
I don't do any of that.
Know what you're talking about? I just see a paint.
Right. Yeah. I'm similar.
All right. We're off on a wayside track.
No,
now.
It's about art. Goodness.
The other question, you said you love to read.
I do.
What do you love to read? Are you a fiction reader, a nonfiction? Do you have fantasy? What is your genre of reading? Because I'm a reader.
Yeah, I like both. And I try to mix it up because I realized I was reading way too much nonfiction related to, my work. So I read a lot about like trauma and mental health. And I was like, I think I need to throw in something fun. So I've been trying to alternate and like read fiction. And I do like fantasy. I like a lot of kind of like modern fantasy, often written by women, because I think sometimes men can spend a lot of time with like world building, and I like to like get into the action and get into the characters right away.
Rude.
So, that's I get it. Again, we're all different, but for me, I want to just like let's get going. We'll figure it out as we go along. I don't need 100 pages of like the politics.
Nice.
Whatever.
Nice.
All right.
We all like what we like, and I don't think we should ever apologize for the things we like. Too many people do that. They're like, I like that. Sorry. I'm like, don't apologize for something you enjoy.
I don't believe in the idea of like a guilty pleasure. If you enjoy it, you enjoy it. Like, who's judging you?
It's a pleasure.
It's a pleasure.
Exactly.
Yeah. Drop the guilty part.
Exactly.
I feel guilty about pounding, by the way, an entire bag of not Easter eggs, jelly bean, little Easter egg things, like an entire disgusting bag, and going, that's a guilty pleasure. It's like, no, I'm just a disgusting pig who just destroyed this bag. That's the best part about Easter, man. I get to eat all the kids' candy.
It's a pleasure.
It's true.
Yeah.
Oh my God. What's that?
I said that's all I remember about Easter is the candy.
That's all there is to remember.
Yeah.
That's going to fall on that's going to not land well with some folks.
Take it back.
Wait, I thought it was about candy.
I'm talking about me.
I'm talking about me. I like candy, damn it. Oh,
like
boy.
Candy.
Oh,
it's the most important part.
I know some groups are going to be thrilled with that statement. Okay, changing subjects. As you know, we like to have a beverage here on the show. What are you drinking today?
So I am drinking a rye old fashioned. I like bourbon old fashions as well, but I like rye because it's got that little spicy kick to it. And I actually made it with a Catoctin rye, which is a distillery near where I grew up in Maryland. So
very
I feel
cool.
like I'm paying tribute to my roots.
We do that a lot here. We have a nice distillery. Well, I'm from Pittsburgh. I enjoy the whiskey, the bourbon, and the ryes that they make. Maybe other people don't. but I like it, and I do like to drink it because it's local. Always try to support local when you can. So very cool. What type of bitters did you use?
So they're bitters that I picked up from a local store in the city. They're called Hellfire bitters. So they've got some orange extract and some like cinnamony spices in there. So I really enjoyed that. I wish I could remember the name of the store. It's this great store. They sell like cocktail ingredients. They sell chocolate. They sell like spices, and then they sell some. It's kind of like a store of like, here are all these things that we like to sell, and it works out really nicely.
Nice. Very good. What are you having, buddy?
So, as said earlier, I feel like this was off podcast, that I'm a degenerate when we were first talking, but I'm not that much of a degenerate where I'm going to start my day off. So you guys are on the East Coast. It's much later for you. So I'm 4 hours behind you. It's 10 in the morning.
Quitter.
So then I started searching my house for what do I have? Well, I had some vodka, and then I was like, vodka and lemonade, great. Except I didn't have lemonade, but I had lemonade flavored Vitarine. So
wow,
I'm doing lemonade, Vitarine, and vodka.
Oh my God! Wow, that's you got to make do, right? There you go. Okay.
Yeah. We're gonna see how this plays out. I don't know.
I threw my arms up. I thought orange juice was coming up because I'm like, yeah, dude, that's the way to go.
I thought so too, except I didn't have orange juice either.
All right.
I was ill prepared for a morning drink.
Well, no pun intended, but I am bitter this morning. The reason I am bitter is because I knew our friend Sarah was going to be joining us most likely with an old fashioned. And I said, that sounds wonderful because I love old fashions. I also love rye old fashioned, and I have everything to make it. And I'm talking, I stir it so you get that nice velvety taste. I make my own simple syrup. I've got some pretty good bitters, which sometimes I switch between the cherry, orange, and then there's that other aromatic. I can't think of what it is, but it's pretty popular with some of them. And I got everything together, and I didn't have my big ice cube. And I refuse to make a drink the wrong way. You do not just throw a glass full of ice when you're making an old fashioned. It requires one big ice cube. And if you don't make it that way, you are making it wrong. So I am drinking, since you're a fan of rye, I am drinking Whistle Pig, 10-year small batch rye, which is very tasty. I'm drinking it on the rocks. And yes, I agree with you. I like the bite, a little bit of the spiciness behind it. So I wish I could join you with your very tasty looking drink, but unfortunately, I will not be there until my ice cubes freeze. Right now, they're just water.
Got it.
Well, we know a little about you now, Sarah. We know what you like to do in your spare time and what you like to drink. Do you want to dive a little bit into your profession and why you came on the show? So I think our personal experiences lead us to certain professions. You mentioned prior that you were late diagnosed ADHD, but also came out within the last couple of years as bisexual. And I liked your wording when you said that. Mike commenting on it earlier too for recording, and you said it as, I came out to myself as bisexual. And that's just, I really love that. But kind of what was your driving factor behind becoming a therapist? Was it your compassion, your desire, or your own personal journey of going through those different things?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I did not think I was going to become a therapist, even when I was in school for social work, and I had colleagues who that's what they knew they were going for. I had no idea. I was like, this profession sounds interesting. I'm gonna get my degree and see where it goes. But so, I think if I can sort of trace it back, despite my maybe somewhat flippant comment earlier, I was raised Catholic, and so one of the things that I appreciated about yes, we can talk about that. But
I'm Irish.
So is Michael.
That's a given.
One of, I was fortunate to grow up. I grew up in suburban Maryland, and I was fortunate to grow up in a relatively, liberal church in the sense that the focus was primarily on like things like social justice and what we could do to sort of give back, right, or to create a world that was aligned with like Christian values of love and care and all of that. So that was something
What
that
a
I
wonderful
really,
thought that is.
right? So that was something that I think really kind of just like got into me at this very sort of like young age, was this idea that that's important, right? That's something important in society, and that's something that's really important to do. And so that was always kind of there in the back of my mind. And then when I, went off, when I was in high school, actually, I took a psych class. I really liked it. Went to college and majored in psych. Again, this whole time, I want you all to know, like, I no directions, no clear plans. I was just like, psych seems interesting. Let's just go with it. Did not really, you're in college, so my professors were all academics, and I didn't really know anything that social work was a profession. It was a lot of like, you're going to go on, you're going to get your PhDs, and you're going to do all this research on rats. And I was like, oh, that's not what I want to do at all. So but I still really wanted to do something that I felt like was contributing to the world. So I went and I worked in nonprofits for a few years in sort of administrative type roles, but I always felt like something was really missing, right? Like I wanted to be able to really connect with people, and I'm sure maybe ADHD and whatever guilt and shame and feeling like a bad person that I had about myself. I had this idea in my head that I was not good at connecting with people, right? I really wanted to, but I had learned at kind of a young age that I was like loud and kind of annoying and I talked too much. And so I was like, well, so that's not really the profession for me, right? I gotta I'm better if I sit back. But I realized I didn't really like that. And then I started volunteering because I was feeling kind of uncertain of what I was doing, didn't really like this administrative type role. So I started volunteering. So RAIN, which is the Rape Abuse Incest National Network, they have a crisis hotline. So they have a phone hotline, but they also have an online hotline. So I had a friend who was doing that, and I started doing that, right? I started engaging. You do this whole, it's like a 40-hour training that they put you through. And then I was doing chat crisis work with folks. And I was really, really enjoying that. Really appreciated that, here's a moment where someone's in crisis and you can provide support to them. You can be this person who is caring and helpful and calm and whatever it is that they might need in that moment. And so that's really what got me to be like, you know what, maybe I'm not so bad with people as I thought. And maybe I could pursue or look for a career where I could really be doing this sort of full time. So that's what ultimately led me to social work. And then through doing that, realized that what I really loved about social work was the counseling piece, the therapy piece, where you really got to sit with folks and try and help them understand what's going on with them, how maybe family has impacted them and past relationships and where they want to go in their lives. I really liked that. I was really enjoying it. I thought I was doing a pretty good job at it. So that's ultimately what led me to, where I am now.
Awesome. Do you have to be numb? And this is just, I have such a heart for things. I can't process certain things that you see in the world. Kids that are neglected, things like rape, incest, as you mentioned. I wouldn't have given any thought to that one, but that. And, we watched a movie recently. My friend's, he's a social worker as well. And so I watched this movie. It was like a Mark Wahlberg movie that recently came out called Instant Family. And
Yep.
It is about fostering kids. And the way they dig into it is they actually kind of touch on some of the things that these kids go through, what their upbringing is like, the process of being able to foster kids, the struggles that the families that do foster the kids, they just think it's going to be easy. Oh, yeah, we just give these kids a loving home and everything's perfect. And it was 10 minutes into the movie and I had tears streaming down my face. And I called my friend. I was like, how the fuck do you do this? How numb and callous do you have to be to how awful, yet important, your job is, but how awful is your job at times to where you have to surround yourself with this every day and you just have to keep, I'm assuming, telling yourself that you're doing good work. Your work is important and you're making a difference. But do you struggle with that at times? Because I just don't think I'd be able to, I just can't process the level of, because I let me step back. I think there is far more good in the world than bad. And I believe that. And I think it is an overwhelming amount of good. But goddamn, does that bad shine? That bad really jumps out at you at times. Is it tough, and does it take a toll?
Yeah, it can for sure. And I would argue that you really need to be the opposite of numb to do this job well. Because, I sit with clients and I feel sad. I feel sad. I feel angry on their behalf. I really try and be as present with them as I can. And, right, then I, of course, have to do what I need to take care of myself so that, I'm not carrying all that with me afterwards.
That's kind of what I meant by the numb piece. I know you can't be numb when you're
right.
helping folks, but just that part afterwards, because I just feel like I wouldn't want to get out of bed the next day. Like, I can't do this again. But then you just go, well, no, I have to. This is what I signed up for, and this is what I enjoy. Okay.
Oh, for sure. And, I worked in domestic violence for 6 years and eventually left. And really why I left was it wasn't so much the people and the work as it was just dealing with like a lot of the bureaucracy involved in working in a nonprofit. And, there's sometimes can be a sense of like, well, it's always going to be this way. And we're always going to be kind of just like, there's just going to be this endless cycle of folks, experiencing terrible things, coming into the office, and we're going to help them the best we can. And then they're going to leave. And then the next group of people who've experienced terrible things. And that's what started to get to me after a while, was that feeling that everyone had just kind of accepted, like, this is just where it is, and we're just going to do our best to, like, fix or help afterwards. And I was starting to feel really just like, ooh, I don't know, like, I just feel like I'm caught up in the same cycle that some of my clients are. So that's what pushed me out of that field in particular. So I don't really specialize in working with domestic violence at this moment, although certainly I have clients who've either been in abusive relationships or experienced that growing up. And I think what I like about the work now is, yes, it can be awful to hear about what people have been through, and it can be really discouraging. And sometimes people are still in it, and they're still really feeling bad. And I think I can hold on to the hope that folks can start to see themselves differently. And if they can start to see themselves differently, maybe they can make those whatever changes they need to get to a place of safety for themselves. And then hopefully for, whatever relationships they may have, if they have kids down the line. So that's what really keeps me moving forward, is this idea of hope, maybe as corny as it sounds, but really that, like, yeah, it sucks what they went through, but it doesn't mean that we have to stay in that story.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think it sounds corny, but I get why you say that, right? But it's also, you have to be realistic at times. And like you said,
Sure.
With the previous job that you had, I just feel like a lot of the times I would go, is this the best we can do? Like, I don't want to accept that this is how it is. We've got to be able to do better. And while I realize this is how it is, that doesn't mean we have to keep going that direction. We could try different things. In fairness, though, we also know resources can be scarce for a lot of communities. And, depending on the size of the city and the organization you work for, I mean, like you said, volunteers, a lot of that work that's done is volunteers. There's limited budgets and finances to make a real difference. So interesting. Wow.
Yeah. And your compassion is why you do what you do, and you have a lot of empathy with your clients as you're in there with them. But that also pulls a lot of burden onto you, like a large, not burden, but a large weight on your shoulder that you're carrying around because you feel that with them. And I guess that's kind of the reason therapists need therapists, right?
Definitely. I have a therapist. I've been in therapy throughout sort of my career. Absolutely. It's so important that we have our own folks that we can go to and we can sort of process what we're dealing with, and also colleagues who know what it's like. I have a sort of started this little get together of folks in my area, fellow therapists, to sort of just get together and be like, yeah, sometimes this work is really hard. Right. And what do we do to stay inspired and motivated despite that?
What do you do to stay inspired and motivated?
Great.
What works for you?
Well, genuinely, I mean, we're talking about Broadway, but honestly, I think things like art does help me stay inspired and motivated, because that's what a lot of art is about, right? It's about folks trying to make sense of things that have happened to them and trying to make sense of relationships. And to me, really powerful art, even if it's not happy, right? It's great when it's like a happy ending and everything works out, right? But even if it's not, there's this sense of connection, I think, that you can feel, or feeling recognized and knowing that other people get it, right? And so that helps me stay, I think, inspired and motivated, is the sense that, like, we're all just out here just trying to figure it out and piece it together and make better choices next time.
Yep.
So that's part of it, of course, getting together with colleagues. And then, I'm a trauma therapist. I work in with a lot of neurodivergent folks. And so also staying optimistic about the field, as hard as it can sometimes be, like we're all beholden to, various financial and social pressures, but trying to stay optimistic about the field. I know that we are continually moving forward in a way that is trying to recognize our clients' humanity, our own humanity as therapists, and become maybe a little bit less pathologizing and a little more understanding, and trying to focus on folks' strengths instead of just diagnosing them, and telling them to, like, take this medication and that's it. But I think the field is moving in a better direction of I don't know, more uplifting, I'll say.
Good. Because I think it's just having an ear. Just, this person listened to me. They let me talk. Mm-hmm. They didn't cut me off. They let me tell them how I felt, and that feels better in and of itself. So that's good. I'm fascinated by just the human brain. I am fascinated by everything, really. It's just, the brain is such a unique and wonderful thing, and scary. But like, I've always kind of joked, like, if I took one of my music CDs and threw it out the window and somebody found it and put it in a car, a CD player. So these things used to be in cars.
Fuck you, but no. That was something when I just bought my new truck, I took all the CDs out of my old truck and I put them in my new truck, and Kayla goes, your new truck doesn't have a CD player, right? There's no point in having those. And I was like, oh no, I guess these are garbage now. And I'm like, it's okay. Like, I'll just load them into my computer onto iTunes, and then I have it on my phone. And when I came in, I looked at my computer and I go, there's no CD drive on this either.
Yeah. That's my per episode joke about your age, and I'm still waiting on you're the old guy joke from you. We will get to that, I'm sure, in a little bit. So sorry.
I mean, how I feel about CDs is probably how you felt about 8-tracks.
Hey, watch it. But this isn't about me. This isn't about me at all. But I like a lot of music, and so if I threw this CD out the window, I'm talking...
Or your favorite 8-track?
Or my favorite 8-track, Wu-Tang, Rod Stewart, Neil Diamond, Rage Against the Machine, The Spinners. Like, you generally don't see music like that back to back. And I really feel like somebody would find it and be like, yeah, we have a serial killer on the loose. Like, this is not normal behavior. But I mean, again, I'd say that jokingly, but when you see certain things in, whether it be society or people you talk with, what is it with you where you go, all right, this makes me want to dig deep with this person, or in general? Is it a societal thing, or do you see it within the individuals where you're like, ooh, that one's interesting to me. I really want to research this or talk about this or try to learn more about this. Is there anything that jumps out at you?
Oh, I mean, I want to learn about everything, honestly. Okay. But I think maybe, are you talking more about like behaviors or things that feel problematic, or just in general?
Behaviors, human behaviors, quirks, maybe just things that we see people do, and just where you go, that's interesting. Like, what is it that causes that action or that behavior? Like, is there anything like that in that sense that jumps out at you?
Yeah, I think I'm always interested in there's a lot of things I'm interested in. I think interpersonally, right? I'm always interested in I'm interested in folks, right? And in the human capacity to have so much compassion for others, right? I love to ask people questions about like, if a friend of yours said something like this, like I'm a terrible person or whatever, people be like, oh no, I would tell them that they were crazy and they were totally wrong, right? So we can have so much compassion for other people, and yet it is so hard so often for us to have that for ourselves, right? And so many of us get caught up in a lot of like shame and guilt and self-blame, and that we're the worst people in the world for truly nothing, right? Truly things that are we can all engage in behaviors that are hurtful, but the level of self-hatred that so many of us engage in is just so disproportionate to the behavior or the the thoughts. So that's something where I'm always wanting to dig deeper, is like where are we getting that? Where is that message coming from that you are such a terrible person, right? So I think that's one thing that I get really interested in. Certainly when it comes to thinking about neurodivergence, right, is, trying to understand, historically when we look at things like ADHD and autism, in particular, a lot of behaviors are pathologized, right? Like how folks engage socially, right? So I talk a lot, and I can go off on like all kinds of crazy digressions, and this can be pathologized, right? As someone who is just, in their own head and like doesn't care about other people. But I'm like, well, but why? If there's so many of us out here who are engaging with the world in this way, like, what is that about? Maybe there's something positive there, right? Maybe there's a reason behind it. Maybe we can look at this as a way of connection and not just being like, oh, you need to like learn to stop talking and shut up, right? So that's something that I'm also interested in, is where you see a lot of people engaging in, like, why? Is there a reason behind it? Is this maybe like a good thing to some? Can we like look at it in a more positive light? So those are a couple of things like sort of interpersonally that I get really interested in. I think on a more maybe like social scale, I get very interested in, and I think it's worth continuing to look at, is there's a lot of projection that we engage in, a lot of seeing others as holding like a group, right? We tend to put onto other people like all these like bad traits, like as a group of people, like this group of people is like really bad, is really evil, is really dangerous, is really stupid, whatever. And so why, when we can like know someone individually maybe and be like, oh yeah, this person's great, but once we put them in a group, right, we're like, oh, but that group of people is really problematic, is really whatever label we want to put on.
Politics today, that's the same exact thing. It's politics, right?
Right. And so that's the thing that's so, absolutely, right. And what is it about us, and how can we maybe work on that to, yes, it's politics, and there's a lot of, we could argue that like humans are sort of like social animals, and that this is a long-standing kind of like evolutionary phenomenon, right, of like the in-group and the out-group, and it's a way for us to maybe protect ourselves. And people show all the time that they're capable of developing empathy and understanding of other folks, especially when we know them on like a personal level. So how can we like expand that, right? So that instead of making that knee-jerk assumption about like the other, we can have some compassion and curiosity about them as like they're people, right? We might not always agree with them, or we might think that some of their behavior is problematic or whatever, but how can we have like curiosity and empathy instead of just like, you're bad?
Yeah, it's I'm a talker, and I ask questions. My questions make so many fucking people uncomfortable, and I don't care, because when I want to know something, I ask. And I remember I waited tables, and a gay guy worked there, and I didn't know he's gay, but he came up and he just had this desire that I knew he was gay. Just, he had to have me know. And it wasn't like the first like time I was like, whoa, like I've heard about you people. I didn't know that was a real thing. But he just, for whatever reason, he needed me to know. And so I said, okay, well, I'll take the bait. And we just started talking, and I was asking him straight guy questions, right? I'm the straight guy, and I wonder this about a gay guy. And we had the best conversation, and somebody else overheard it. They're like, dude, I can't. And I didn't ask anything crazy, but I asked questions that maybe some people think that other people are too afraid to ask. Well, I'm not afraid to ask those questions. And it was like, we're best friends. Like 10 minutes into the conversation, he's like, dude, do you know how many people won't ask me that? And I was like, I mean, that's on them. Like, I don't know how to say that. And we had the best relationship after that. And I remember I met this guy once, and we just chatted for a few, and he was a friend of an ex-girlfriend and a coworker. And like, he was, for lack of a better term, hope I don't get in trouble with this. Like, he was a guy that you met and you knew instantly, this guy is probably gay, right? I just say that so we can paint the picture. And the reason I say that is because he was very uncomfortable around straight men, like really disturbingly uncomfortable. And after about a half hour, he just started crying to me. And he's like, you're the first straight guy that I feel comfortable around. And we became like best friends after that. It was just like, he was such a nice guy. And I was so curious as to like, what has happened to you, or have you heard, or have you been subject to that makes you feel that way? Because all I'm just a guy sitting next to you at a bar. We're having a conversation. We're making small talk, but there was a barrier that was broken down for him in that moment that was, I mean, I hope in a way life-changing. I hope that maybe he met more people that he was comfortable with after that. But I think maybe this guy doesn't judge me. This guy doesn't look at me like, oh, here's this gay dude or whatever it was. But there was something, I always remember that. And I was like, wow, the brain's fascinating. Like, it's really just almost sad that people have to feel that way, that they fall into this small group and they can't step outside of that because there's something holding them back.
Yeah, and I think your example shows that for a lot of people, I think sometimes it comes from real trauma that they may have experienced, right? So, obviously without knowing this guy's story, yeah, maybe he's experienced, some prejudice or some discrimination or whatever from other straight men. And so we often then, to protect ourselves, we'll retreat, right? And we'll be like, well, my experiences have been pretty negative, so I'm not going to bother giving anyone else a chance, right? Because I don't want to get hurt again. It's too scary. And it can feel, unfair, especially for those of us who feel like, well, I'm not that. But it's also worth understanding where those traumas are coming from, right? And that we're all just trying to protect ourselves the best that we can. And sometimes it works, but a lot of times it gets in the way of connection. But it's just our brain, right, trying to protect us.
It's just, we protect ourselves in different ways. And the way I do it may be different from you and different from anyone listening. So you hear what we're saying, people? Just be aware that people go through things, and maybe ask questions and don't judge.
Yeah.
That's my message for the day.
I mean, I kind of want to touch on something in that area too, where we're talking about behaviors and the trauma that's possibly, caused them, like Michael Sandy, the man that was so uncomfortable around straight men because most likely it was possibly then received prejudice and things like that. I do want to jump into a little bit on the other side of your focus. You focus a lot on neurodiversity as well. And for listeners that maybe don't understand what that term neurodiversity means, I was wondering if you could give us some examples of some of the areas you focus on and who can chat on those a little bit. But specifically, I kind of want to chat a little bit about the interconnectivity between trauma and some of those neurodivergent conditions and how one can cause the other.
Great, absolutely. Thank you. So neurodivergence kind of broadly, right? So there's this, the term was coined, I want to say in like the 80s or the 90s. And it was really to help us start to understand mental differences, less from this pathologizing way in which my profession often has, right? Which is like you're depressed, you're anxious, you're schizophrenic, whatever, very, kind of labeling folks and seeing this as a problem that needs to be fixed in these very specific kind of ways, whether that is through like medication or therapy or whatever. And instead saying like, what if brains, just like anything else, have natural differences, right? Have natural diversities. And part of the work is that we as a society could be more accommodating and understanding of those differences, right? Because often what happens is we say like, well, this is the norm. And so anybody who falls outside of the norm, is problematic. right? It
Right.
needs to be changed, right? And that is true, I think, of anything, right? I mean, for example, when we think about sexuality, right? Historically, that's been the attitude, right? Is that if you are not, heterosexual, then that's bad and wrong, and you need to do something to fix that. So this concept came up about when it comes to brains, and so what that term means is a little fluid, right? For some folks, they use it to apply to things like ADHD and autism, which definitely, from all the research that we have, seem to be like developmental, like you're born this way, right? And this is just how your brain is. And part of the challenge that you face in the world is less that there's something wrong with your brain and more that society isn't necessarily set up to accommodate the way that your brain thinks, right? And then all the way on the other end are folks who are like, neurodiversity is any kind of mental health difference. So PTSD, right? Post-traumatic stress disorder, bipolar, depression, and anything that's kind of like outside the norm, we're going to put into neurodiversity, right? So, it's a little bit of a fluid definition. But for me, when I'm using it, I do look at folks whose brains seem to be processing the world differently than maybe we expect. Oftentimes there's a very like high sort of sensitivity to sensory input, or sometimes we have like decreased sensitivity to sensory input, just a different way of processing sensory information and different way of engaging socially, right? Those are some of the key differences that we see when I'm thinking about neurodiversity, and I use those terms with my clients. That's what I'm thinking of and really looking at, right? Regardless of the particular diagnosis it falls under. So that's kind of the overview. I work with this. I'm definitely not the expert. So if folks are interested, definitely, Google, look it up. There's a lot of great resources out there, so you can learn more. Yes. I think you asked about sort of trauma and neurodiversity and how those things overlap, right?
Yeah.
Correct. Yes. How they interconnect.
Yeah. So a couple things, right? So if we're thinking of neurodiversity as kind of anything where our brains are working differently, then for example, you could say someone who has post-traumatic stress disorder could be considered neurodivergent because as a result of experiencing trauma, the way that they are processing and moving through the world is going to be different than it would otherwise, right? So you may be more hypervigilant to cues or anything that could signify danger. You may have a really difficult time trusting people because you've had these negative experiences where other people have hurt you or betrayed you, right? You may experience dissociation, right? So dissociation is that sort of like out of body experience. Many of us have like had this at some point in our lives where we just kind of feel disconnected from what's happening around us. Even, you like scroll through like TikTok or something and all of a sudden like an hour went past, you didn't notice. That could be a type of dissociation, right? We're so involved in something else that we're not paying attention to the world around us. That's very common for people who've experienced trauma because the world around them was scary and dangerous. And so one way our brains cope with that is by dissociating, right? By kind of checking out. And it can be folks who feel like it's like an out of body experience to even like not even remembering what happened to them, right? Because their brain didn't really process that memory. And that's certainly a different way of experiencing the world. And so folks who have trauma, that they may continue to experience dissociation throughout their lives, right? I have clients who are like, I was talking to someone and then I just started feeling triggered. And I just didn't feel like I was there anymore. Like I wasn't really present. I felt like there was like a wall of glass between me and the other person. That's a different way of interacting with the world, right? Similarly, depression, anxiety, these things can also be the results of trauma, right? If we have really bad things happen to us, especially let's say at a young age, it's understandable that we might feel pretty depressed about ourselves and about the world around us and feel like maybe there's no reason to take care of ourselves, and in extreme cases that there's no reason to go on living. And so that's certainly going to impact how we process the world and understand what's going on, right? So that's one way that we can look at neurodivergence and trauma, right? That trauma can really cause fundamental changes to the way that our brain and our nervous system functions. Certainly things like therapy and medication and community and all other types of healing can help with that. But then we also see that neurodivergent folks are going to be more likely a lot of times to experience trauma, right? And that comes back to, right, people who don't fit in, who seem a little weird, who seem a little off, who seem different. We don't always know how to handle them, right? And so a lot of times folks experience mistreatment, not always conscious, to what you were saying. I think most people are decent or trying to be decent, but people get scared by things that are different. They don't know how to handle it.
Very true.
They freak out. And so you have, let's say, an autistic kid who's really sensitive to light and sound and the feeling of their clothes and the texture of the food. And they don't quite know the social rules of engagement with the other kids around them. And so they are just not acting like we would expect a kid to act. They are freaking out in school because everything is so bright and so loud. And so a teacher who has 30 other kids maybe doesn't have the knowledge or skills to be like, hey, why don't we go take a seat in this quiet corner and put on some headphones and chill. They may be like, you need to get your shit together or else I'm kicking you out of the classroom. Right. And then they go home and mom and dad are like, I don't get it. You're so smart. Why are you such a problem in school? Right? You just need to figure it out. And so we have all these things compounding, right? Especially for folks who are not getting diagnosed or not being recognized. All these things are compounding and they're trying to force themselves to fit into this world that they don't really understand and doesn't understand them. And that's really traumatizing because you just learn this lesson that there's something wrong with you, that the world is scary and there's something wrong with you and probably nobody's going to help you. Right. So that's the other way in which neurodivergence and trauma can really intersect.
I had a neighbor that needed help. It was a single mom. She had 3 sons, but they were younger, and they would do this for Christmas. They would just rent these ovens, like industrial commercial ovens, bring them to the house and make cookies. Her entire family would get together. And I'm just, if you haven't figured out, I'm pretty social, like to interact with people. I'm also a big child, so I love hanging out with kids. I was very lucky when I grew up that everyone treated me like, air quotes, one of the guys. My dad played softball, so I was the bat boy. Nobody treated me like, oh, that's his son. I was one of the guys. And so I have this part of me that always wants to treat other kids the same way. And I came into the house to help move one of these ovens, and I just saw this kid there, and I was like, hey, dude, what's going on, man? And went to high five him, and he kind of backed away. And I was like, oh, okay, he's shy. And I left and went, moved the oven. And these were heavy ass ovens, so it took a few minutes, and then went back out to bring another one in. And when I walked through the door, this kid was on the ground, and there was like every adult in the house surrounding him, and he looked like he was possessed, like he was absolutely going ballistic. And I thought, I didn't know what, my heart sunk. I was like, is he okay? What happened? I didn't know if he was having a heart attack. I didn't know, some sort of seizure. Yeah, it was my fucking high five that did that. I came in super hot with the, hey, dude. And apparently nobody told me not to. So I'm fucking dying inside. And the lady was like, it's okay. It happens all the time. I was like, yeah, but I caused it. She's like, it's okay. It happens all the time. It's okay. And I still, to this day, it bothers me that I put that kid into that episode, but she was literally like, he can't even be in school. We knew it would happen today. And then she says, we just didn't know you would cause it. I said, you son of a bitch.
Warning would have been good.
Yeah, let me know. Don't come doing cartwheels into the fucking living room trying to high five every kid. But it was I'd never experienced anything like that.
Yeah.
So it was wow, okay, so that's a real thing when you hear autism and the spectrum. There is a spectrum for sure, because I've talked with autistic folks. I didn't even know they were autistic. I've then had that end of the spectrum where it was like, is he going to be okay? And so do you see, is there a lot of, and maybe there's not a big enough sample size, I don't know how long social media has been around, but do we have enough to maybe admit finally that social media is a problem more than it is a good thing? Because I feel there's so much trauma that comes from not getting likes and not getting followers and not being able to distinguish a friend from a follower and things like that. Or is that just still so new that we don't have data yet?
I think we have data in both directions, right? So we do have data that social media can be very problematic and can be traumatizing for sure, right? It presents, yes, we have created a culture, unfortunately, that tells us that our value comes from, right, how many likes and our engagement and all of that on social media. And certainly folks have used social media to engage in bullying, and to even with adult clients, you know, who are like, I know, but I go on my Instagram and I see all these people who are living these like happy lives and everybody's so like thin and beautiful and everything, and I feel really insecure and bad about myself, right? So absolutely, social media can be really problematic, right? And on the flip side, social media can also be really inspiring and reassuring and educational for folks, right? I think it's a tool. It's a tool. It's a medium, just like anything. And I think part of what we need to be doing, especially when we're talking about young folks, is like parents and adults need to know what is going on with the young people in their lives, and they need to be engaging with them, and they need to be having like these conversations about, you know, social media and how we engage with it, and understanding that like, yes, it can be really, you know, you can find like great like body positive accounts, right? Or like autistic folks talking about their lives in these ways that are really like informative and helpful, but you can also find a lot of really negative stuff on there. And so that's part of it, is having that knowledge and being willing to engage with people and talk about both sides of it. So that's where I come down.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair. And I mean, in a way, I mean, I met Trevor playing video games, and that's social media technically. So you know what? It breaks my heart to see people bullied online, and it's crazy. It's like every comment, every video somehow, some way leads to bullying. I will tell you one. I had COVID. Now, I will say that. I said it again. I had COVID. Now, if this was a social media post, I would get 50 posts that would tell me that it's a conspiracy and it never happened and it's not real. One of the things that I experienced, and still to this day, I had about 3 years ago, I still have not fully recovered from my taste is all jacked up. My smell is jacked up. Note for our listeners, haven't smelled a fart in about 4 years or 3 years or whatever it's been. Kind of weird. That's not normal, but you know, whatever. I am struggling with the taste and the smell thing to the point where it's bothersome to me. It's affecting me, not a lot, but it is, because I like to eat, I like to cook, I like the smells, I like the experience, everything. So I said, oh, I need to find somebody else that has experienced this. And I went onto Reddit. Hey, Reddit. Has anyone else...
The king place of trolls?
Hey, Reddit.
Reddit has the most trolls of anything. I swear to God, wrong place to go.
Has anyone experienced this? And what do you have? What have you done? I have a smell kit that I'm trying to use to try to retrain some of the connections between my brain and my... I can't think of the sensor, but the smell thing. And it was like, I came back like 10 minutes later. It was like -14 karma, -20 karma. You're a fucking idiot. You fucking moron. You're so stupid. It's never been a real thing. Long COVID is a hoax. It's the fucking Russians. Like every insult that could come my way. And I'm like, what the fuck did I do? I'm just a guy trying to figure out if other people are struggling with fucking smelling good Thanksgiving dinner. Do you know what it's like to have Thanksgiving dinner when you can't smell it? It fucking sucks. And so, excuse me for maybe hoping somebody else could say to me, I've been there. I understand it is hard. And then I got obliterated. And so like I removed the post and I was like, oh my God, people are monsters. And then I told my wife and she goes, the fuck did you expect? I expected exactly what I got now that I'm thinking about it. So, but people are brutal. It's an awful place. I feel bad for kids. Do you think that it should be censored? Like as we do the podcast, social media is a great tool. You said it yourself. It can be used for a lot of different things. We'll put clips out on Instagram. Hey, we've got episodes coming up and so on. And I just told him the other day, I said, dude, Twitter is a cesspool. Like it is a cesspool. And the algorithms want me to see death. They want me to see violence. They want me to see sex. They want me to see nothing productive. I certainly haven't seen a video that I was like, oh, that's uplifting. It's like, hey, do you want to see a guy get run over by a train? Because for some reason, Twitter wants me to see that. And fighting and sucker punches. And I just, That's one I can't really get behind. Whether I don't think it has anything to do with new ownership, if you get what I'm saying. I think it's just always been out there. I think it's humanity. But I think that these algorithms are written a certain way because they know, I think they have psychologists on staff that are employed by them to say, yeah, what can we do to really reel these people in? Showing people being hit by trains, that'll work. And somehow, like you said, 3 hours later, it's like, how many people have I seen die in videos in the last 25 minutes? And it's really disturbing. Like when you pull yourself out of it and look and go, what have I been doing for the last X amount of, hours or whatever it is? So, oh, goodness. Yeah. I guess so, I guess maybe not necessarily changing. I talk about my feelings. Like I try to really open up. And sometimes too much.
I do not.
He's the opposite, right? He's the guy that maybe internalizes and talks on his own time, or maybe he talks in individuals. But we've had a couple good conversations and other things where it's just like, he's a little quiet at times. Don't worry, I'm not insulting you. It's just you're a little quiet at times. We've talked about this, my friend.
I know, it's fact. Weird that a guy that's as quiet as I am has a podcast. But here I
am. Seriously, I've heard you need to talk more. No, you talk just enough. You're perfect the way you are. But seriously, it's not everyone's approach to talk. And it's not right, wrong. It's just, it is what it is. Sure. But I think that there is truth to talking about it made me feel better. And is there an approach that you take or that people can take that maybe don't like to talk and air their feelings out there for people that maybe they can try that would be helpful?
Absolutely. There's so many different interventions and things we can do. So first of all, listen, therapy's great, but therapy is not for everyone. And I think that's really important. Like sometimes I think we can be like, oh, you just got to go to therapy. Like, okay, but you don't have to. I think what's most important is that you are finding what works for you to do whatever it is that you are looking for, right? So for some of us, we really need to express and get out like, I've been holding this shit in for 20 years and I need to tell someone, right? And that can be really healing to have somebody else who is empathetic and understanding and say like, wow, like that's a lot, like how do you feel about that? What are we going to do with that? How do we stop that from getting in your way now, right? And that can be really great. And sometimes that's not what we need, right? So there's a lot of great somatic therapies out, folks who maybe just want to get more in touch with like what's happening internally in like their bodies. And that can be really helpful. There's art therapy, music therapy, right? You mentioned music. All of those can be great ways for us to express ourselves. For some people, I talked about growing up in the Catholic Church. For some folks, spirituality, right? And finding a spiritual community or a spiritual tradition can feel really healing. And that could be something that you're doing in community with others, or it could just be something that you do on your own, right? I'm a big fan. Personally, I try to meditate regularly. I'm not going to pretend and say I do it every day. But I try and do it somewhat regularly as a way for myself to kind of just get in touch with myself, right? And like, what am I feeling? Right? What's going on for me today? What do I need to be paying attention to? Right? And that is a way for me to connect. And I don't necessarily need to then go and tell someone like, oh, I was feeling angry this morning.
Right.
Maybe I just need to like acknowledge it and process it and let it go. Right. But that can be really helpful. Right. I will say this. I think journaling, of course, right? A lot of my clients really like to journal as a way to process and get.
My wife loves to write stuff down. Loves it.
Right?
Every morning she gets up, hear music, I hear writing. Right, I'll hear writing.
I love it. Right?
I hear writing.
That's great. That's great. I am so impressed by folks who have that commitment, and that could be a really great way to process, right? Because sometimes it's not until we start writing that we get out. We realize, oh yeah, like that's really on my mind. But I will say this: I think when it comes to healing, right? If there's things that we need to heal from, right? Traumas, pain, whatever. I do think ultimately that happens in connection with others, right? Because one of the things about trauma that I genuinely really do believe is that part of what makes things feel traumatizing is that we feel overwhelmed by the experience, right? It's like beyond our ability to really cope with it, but it also causes us to feel disconnected from other people. Right.
Okay.
What we know from like research and from, my own therapeutic experience and in working with folks is that when something big and scary happens, but we have other people that are there with us and can help us like debrief and like make sense of it and process it, we can actually heal or sort of move past it a lot faster. Right. What often is really makes things feel traumatizing is this big, scary, awful thing happened to me. Right. Maybe as a child, right, I was experiencing like, let's say, emotional neglect or abuse, or maybe as an adult, I was in like a domestic violence situation. And there's nobody I can go to for help. And I feel completely isolated and I'm trying to cope with this on my own and I can't. Right. We have this idea in researchers have come up with this idea that before we even get to that fight or flight moment, we start with the tend and befriend approach, meaning our first instinct is to look for others. Right? Is to look for other people who can help us when something scary is happening. And it's when that's not available that we're going to jump into that fight or flight response or that freeze response, right? But our first instinct is to look for other people, right? And so when that's not available, that's really traumatizing. And so I do genuinely believe that in order to sort of like heal from whatever, we need other folks. And it doesn't have to mean that you have to find someone that you tell every single intimate detail of everything that's ever happened to you. Like that can be great. You don't have to do that, but finding someone that you feel like can empathize with you and care about you and that you can connect with and that you can trust, that I do think is important when it comes to healing, right? Again, it doesn't have to be everything that you tell them, but someone that you can tell some of your feelings to, right? Someone that can sort of empathize with. That I do think is important. We can't do all of this on our own. Humans are social creatures at the end of the day. We function best with others.
Okay. Very cool.
I was thinking about functioning with others. Part of that is feeling like a part of the group. And we hear things like fitting in or I don't fit in, I don't belong. A lot of these can start at an early age. And I can imagine that's pretty tough, but also an understanding of I may be different, which is okay. It's okay to be different. And is the goal to have these things put in place to help every possible type of neurodivergent condition, every possible scenario, like Mike was talking about earlier with that child. But then you have kind of conflicting ones, right? Where you have the beeps at a crosswalk, which is going to help a visually impaired person can send an autistic person into a state of overstimulation, right? And they could have a breakdown in that same intersection that is designed to help someone is hurting someone else. So is there, catering for everyone for, it's the lack of a better phrase, right? Is that have its own set of difficulties of trying to cater to everyone? Where do we start and where does that go? How do you deal with that?
Great question. Yeah, absolutely. We can't, right? We can't cater to everyone. That would be impossible. When we are thinking about accommodation, it is more, it is what are things that we can do maybe on a societal level, right? For example, the beeps at the crosswalk, right? But also, part of it is as an individual, what can we do? So maybe, when I work with folks who are neurodivergent or even for myself sometimes, right? It's like, okay, well, I know I'm going to be going out into this busy intersection. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my noise canceling headphones or like my little earplugs that dampen the noise so that if there is unexpected sounds like beeping, it's less likely to dysregulate me. Right. And then it is recognizing, oh, I heard that was dysregulating. I'm starting to feel really agitated. So what do I do? What do I need to do now in this moment to take care of myself? Right. Like that was a lot more than I expected. So you know what? I'm going to like duck into this little coffee shop for, a few minutes and like regulate, breathe, etc. so that I can go out. Right. It's about learning. Yes, I think we absolutely need to do things. Right. So for example, have, public spaces, theater, museums, places should try and have rooms that are like calm, sort of like dim lighting, not too loud, spaces where folks can go when they're starting to feel overwhelmed or dysregulated, and they can go and they can sit and they can chill and they can take care of themselves and then go on with their day, right? That is a relatively simple thing that I think we could offer in more places, right?
Right.
But then it's the individual's responsibility to figure out, on their own or with therapists or whatever, how to recognize when they need a space like that, right? Or to say, like, you know what? It was a really fucking hard week for me. So I'm actually not going to go to this really crowded museum because even though I'm looking forward to it, I know that that is going to be too much for me and it's not worth me pushing myself, right? So we have to balance all of that, right? Same thing when it comes to trauma, right? I work with folks and we have to recognize when things are triggering, right? When things cause us, like, you know what? I'm not going to watch that movie because I know it's going to have a scene in it, or I know what the description of the plot is. And like, that's not for me. I'm not going to watch it. That's fine, right? We can do that. But also, as a society, what can we do? We can give folks some content warnings. We can give folks some information ahead of time and be like, hey, just as an FYI, like, there's going to be some tough stuff in this. So it's your call if you want to engage with it, right? We can do both without having to like never talk about tough things or never have stimulating environments, but we can let people know ahead of time and then people can work with themselves to figure out what they can handle, right? So I think we all have parts to play in mitigating that, but there's no way to prevent it 100%. And that's that's impossible.
I think accommodate was that's a good word, accommodate, because I always say, cater to everyone. Exactly. Sounds so negative because there's such a negative connotation to it, but I don't think it has to be. It's just sometimes we literally don't know what the word is, but I think I like accommodate.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Accommodate. I mean, I like what you're saying about that also falls on the person a little bit, or the caretaker of the person, to help regulate that situation and know what they're going into. And then you were talking about kind of warnings and stuff like that, and for traumatic things that might come up. And as you were talking about earlier, you being a reader, meeting a reader, so many of the books we read, me and my group of friends I read with, and we have our little book club, we talk about the trigger warnings before we go into it. And hey, this has an open water trigger warning. If you don't like open water, maybe don't read this one. Or this has, so many different things. And one of the big ones in our group is mistreating of animals in books, like especially dogs. Like if there's like a dog death in a book, like we have certain people that need to know there's going to be a dog death in this book before we read it. And like, if it is, they're like, I'm going to pass on this one because I know it's going to upset me. And that's okay. Like, to know those things and say, that's not going to be for me, And so I love that, like self-regulation and knowing what's in such and avoiding those situations a little bit and taking a little bit of the self-responsibility on it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's all it is, right? It's okay for you to say, like, that's not for me. Not everything has to be for everyone. And that's totally fine for you to know your own limits, right? And if you want to get to a place where you can maybe read a book like that, fine. That's something you can also write. You can work on with therapists or through yourself. Maybe you want to get to a place where this doesn't bother you. Great. But you can also make that decision of like, I never want to get to that place. I never want to read about this. Fine. Right? Know yourself. But I love that you guys do that. I think that's so great to like just give folks that heads up, give people that option of like how they want to engage with the material and whether they want to engage with it. Right? So it's so easy, but
I'm an asshole. I'm going to apologize to my wife here for when this airs, and I'm guilty of this. Again, I'm comfortable with my mistakes as a human being and acknowledging them. Joe Dirt was on TV, and it's one of those movies that when it's on, it just somehow stays on, which is like catch it in the middle, catch it at the beginning, the last time. It doesn't matter. It's just on. And there is a scene where the girl's dad, Brittany, what's her name? Brittany. I can't think of her name in the movie. The blonde girl with the dog. The dad takes the dog and shoots a dog. Obviously, they don't show this in the movie, but it's implied they get rid of the dog, which kind of leads to the trauma of Joe Dirt and the whole situation. And so my wife looks away And I cannot tell you, every time it's on, I go, for fuck's sake, it's a fucking comedy. It's a movie. What the fuck is the big deal? It is now like hearing you say the things the way you say them is I'm going to take this minute to apologize to her and say that I'm sorry that I do that, because I'm telling her, it's like, it's not real. The dog's okay. The dog's fine. But she doesn't experience it that way. It somehow with her sits there like this dog is actually being killed. She can't even stomach. She'll walk out of the room. She'll turn. She'll cover her head. She'll look away. Yeah, it's really, and I'm an asshole. So to my wife, I'm sorry. I realized that is not the best way to handle that situation. And from now on, when we watch Joe Dirt, I will also put my head under the covers and look away because I don't like it. So that is a little learning experience for me right there. So thank you both for bringing that up. That's really interesting. I laugh at some trigger warnings as well. And I don't mean that in a dickish way, but one that caught my attention was they have tons of warnings now in movies, right? Hey, this contains this sexually explicit material, violence. I saw rape next to cigarette smoke, and I laughed. I said, oh my God, like, how are those two in the same ballpark? Like, how can it say this movie contains rape and cigarette smoke? And I was like, wow, like, that's an interesting way all over the place. Like, they're not connected, but then I'm wondering, where does the cigarette smoke? I was like, it's like people, kids, right? You don't want kids to smoke, but then how, like, if you can watch a movie with that subject, like, it's just, again, I think it's just being ignorant, but not in an ignorant way, right? The definition of ignorant, I just don't know. And so that's an interesting kind of trigger warning there, is that one that I laughed at it, but it wasn't like I'm being insensitive. It was just like, how are those two even in the same ballpark? But for some people, maybe they are. Maybe that one's okay, this one's not, or vice versa. So I need to, I guess, maybe be a little more aware of that when I'm watching things. So I'll be better, I promise. She's shaking her head at me. You're both shaking. No, I'm just teasing. Oh my goodness. We do talk, and I guess I'm doing that right now. We talk a lot on the show about, issues, right? Like I said, I do express, I tend to express things with a little more anger. Not, how do I word this? I've said this before, where it's like a balloon. I like to kind of let the pressure out so that the anger doesn't build, because I see things. For example, yesterday, I was trying to get to a gas pump, and a guy pulled into the gas pump to go into the store, and he had an electric vehicle. So he parked at the pump that I needed, the only pump available, with an electric vehicle. And it was like, wow, really, dude? Like, that's it? That's what I need right now, is I need gas, and you're running into the store in front of the only gas pump. And it was like, so we just let them out, just slowly let a little air out. But, and I don't know if I grew up thinking that anger and yelling and things like that was like, that's how you deal with issues. But, as I grow as a person, as I grow in age, I'm a father, and it's not right. Like, I tell my kids that, like, a lot of times if I do raise my voice, like, I'm an animated person. I'm not yelling at you. And sometimes kids hear loud and they think yell. They hear loud, they think I'm in trouble. And I try to really get across to them that I'm just a loud person. I'm just a loud individual. But sometimes, again, when I do get angry, I raise my voice. What's a good starting point? I guess this isn't a therapy session, but is there a way for people that maybe have that personality to kind of say, hey, maybe try this next time? Because I think a lot of people yell. Everyone wants to hear, they want to be heard. So our voices get louder as human beings. But I'll take a tip if you have one.
Yeah, so, listen, I think anger is just like any emotion, right? I think it's healthy. I think it's appropriate in certain circumstances. And I think we get into problems when we deny our anger. But yeah, we also get into problems when anger can substitute for kind of every other emotion. Or it just kind of comes out in these ways that can feel kind of like violent and aggressive, even if we're not feeling violent and aggressive, right? So one thing I really try and work on with folks is, recognize it. Like, we got to take it back, right? How do we know that we're getting angry? What's coming up in our bodies? I get angry too. And so one thing I've had to really work on is recognizing, like, how does that show up for me when I'm starting to feel agitated? Something is triggering me or making me angry. How is it showing up for me in my body, right? And what is it that needs to happen in that moment, right? Is this something that needs to be expressed to someone, the person who's making me angry? And if it is, then, like, I need to do that self-regulation of, like, I need to breathe. I need to, maybe, like, take a little walk or do something else, right, to discharge it. So then I can come back and have a conversation with someone in a way that is productive and not just, like, blaming and yelling and all of that, right?
Okay.
If it's not, maybe we're angry about something and we can't do anything about it, right? We can't have a conversation, right? That guy was just, like, an asshole. Maybe, like, in the, like, confines of your car, you just need to be like, oh, dude, like, what the fuck, right?
I was
like,
with my kids and I was like, I said, Daddy's going to drive away. And my daughter goes, what's wrong, Daddy? And I just said, you don't understand electric vehicles, but they don't need the pump. I said to her, it is best that I'm just going to drive away and find another gas station.
Right. And sometimes that's it, right? As we drive, and that can actually, like, and then maybe you get to the other gas station, you get out and you're like, we gotta, like, shake it off. We gotta, like, do that. Seriously, get the energy out, because anger, and a lot of times it's, like, energizing, and that's where sometimes it can come out in yelling or, like, aggressive behaviors. It's because we're not letting ourselves discharge whatever it is, whatever that
right
emotion is. So finding a way to discharge it in a way that feels healthy and safe. But I'm glad that you were able to, communicate to your kids without yelling and losing your temper. It's just like, that's gonna drive away.
I said, I'm out.
This is a recurrent thing that we've talked about, and I feel like you think you have anger issues, but I want to tell you personally, from my side of things, I think you deal with anger very healthily. I have seen people with anger issues, and you are not one of them.
I acknowledge that it's anger.
So I just want to make that, but acknowledging my anger and having anger issues is different.
What I realized is, and I was thinking about this yesterday, so, like, on the topic of social media, things come across different in a text message. Things come across different in writing.
Absolutely.
I used to have,
you can't hear tone, and it's so different.
Context is missing a lot of the times. I was always, when I loved social media when it came out, I was like, oh man, I can write thoughts down and people will laugh at them. And because my sense of humor is very animated, some of the comedians that I like are fairly dark. And it's like, whoa, like, I've always tried to find humor in things that are not funny, because I think that helps me process things that aren't funny, things that are painful, things that hurt people. And again, it's probably some sort of defense mechanism for me, but
you're a lover of dead baby jokes.
It's oh, man. That's
I know this.
No, that story. Okay. I will.
Okay.
She's shaking her head. She's wondering. We're going to tell you that one. I am not a fan of dead baby jokes, but we will. You son of a bitch. You just say that.
I had to.
Fine. We're going to take a sidebar right now, so everyone now understands the context behind this. This is hysterical. So, I am remarried. My wife is also remarried. To me, of course, obviously. She found a service that will take old wedding dresses and will use the fabric to donate to parents who have lost a child. And the sweetest thing you can do, because it's just so, I have this dress and it's a beautiful dress and the fabric is beautiful. And then there's this. And so she donated her dress, and however, 6 months later, we got a swatch of fabric back and a note from a family that had lost a baby. And I'm not laughing about it, but it was like, I'm like tearing up saying this. And the note was very heartfelt, and what that dress meant to them in a time that they needed that. And really, truly one of the just weird combination of, this is the saddest thing and the happiest thing I'm ever reading at the same time. And I was telling my friend that, who was just a really kind soul. Like he's just a wonderful human being. And I know he will listen to this episode. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. However, he does have a fucked up sense of humor like me. And so we tell him this and he pauses and he says, wait a minute. Wait. Dead babies are getting married? And and it was what I needed to hear in that moment that I laughed, because I was crying telling him that story. I was like, I still don't like reading it. And I'm assuming she still has it, the note, but like that was the reference that Trevor was making right there. So I thought a little context was necessary for our drop off in listeners. It's like
pretty mild. I think as far as thing goes.
Yeah.
I think humor is great though. I use humor in session with folks. I think I love to watch media and engage with media that uses humor as a way to explore things that are dark and upsetting, because I think it helps, right? It helps us feel like we can tolerate it, like we can handle the hard stuff.
So I'm not off on that then. I'm okay.
No, okay. Absolutely. I think dark humor is, I had a client once who, what were they watching? They got really into true crime, and they were like, okay, my partner wanted me to ask, like, am I a sociopath because I like to watch true crime? And I was like, no, you're not a sociopath because you like to, there's something about it that is engaging and interesting and probably helping you process some of your own feelings and things that have happened in your own life. But engaging with dark stuff or even things that are scary and horrible can absolutely be a way for us to process things that are otherwise too big for us to handle on our own.
Yeah, I like roller coasters and I hate heights. And I think one of the roller coaster things that I enjoy is because it's one of my favorite things to do. The higher and scarier, the better. I can't climb a ladder to cut like a limb off of a tree, but I am in a controlled environment that I know I will come out good. But it is a rush. It is a rush to but like as we're going up that hill, because they make that the slowest ascent in the journey, it's horrifying. And when I say I am scared, I am like, don't talk to me, don't look at me, don't touch me. I need to be left alone right now. And the second it starts moving fast, I'm okay with the height. It's the slow and the height combined,
the anticipation
that bothers me. But when I get off the ride, I'm like, oh yeah, let's do it again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Adrenaline.
You were nodding your head. She was like, "Yep."
Addictive drug.
She was like, "It's."
I'm the same actually, but I totally agree with you. I think control is actually really important, right? I think we all, and again, when we come back to thinking about trauma, one of the things that's scary about heights or anything that feels traumatizing is there's a lack of control, right? We can't do anything. We're just at the mercy of whatever's happening to us. But we're in a roller coaster. Let's say you chose to get on that roller coaster. It feels safe. It feels contained, right? Maybe we're with people that we love. So it's scary, but it's scary in a way that feels manageable. Right. And so absolutely, I think that's the appeal for a lot of folks, myself included. But the same thing goes for like horror movies or anything that kind of like gets that adrenaline going, I think, for a lot of folks, right? It's that combination of scary and safe at the same time.
Right. Oh, okay. That makes me feel good then. I'm not a psycho, because everyone's like, wait, why do you like roller coasters if you're scared of heights? I'm like, I am terrified of heights. And I'm talking like even step ladders, like 2 or 3 things just to sometimes hang a picture. I'm like, I don't know if I like that. And totally. I also found out recently, I think I have thalassophobia, which is the fear of deep water, because I think it also triggers kind of the same thing. Yeah, go ahead, laugh, Trevor. Because you look down, and if the water's clearer, it's the same kind of, oh well, I'm so high off the bottom down there. Mm-hmm. So that's a new one for me. We don't need to get into that. I'll save that for a therapy session. Look into that one. Oh my. So when you filled out our guest intake form, you brought up something that I thought was very interesting. And we have a controlled environment here. Speaking of controlled environments. So I like something that you said. And I want to read it. It's a quote that you like. It's a passion, we'll say. And I also would like to say that I don't think a lot of people enjoy hearing things that may put somebody or a group of folks into this thing. So I'm gonna read this here. And what you said was that you it's learning about and interrogating the white Western male heterosexual bias of mental health and the impacts of capitalism and colonialism on mental health, which is, it's a mouthful. That was a hard one to read. I'm glad I got that out correctly. Those are fucking fighting words for a lot of people, right? I'm supposed to be mad right now. I just want you to know. I'm supposed to be triggered because you said white. Let's go. Let me look at this again. You said white, you said Western, you said male, and you said heterosexual. I am literally all of those things in my colonizing ass as well, I guess we could say, right? So I'm supposed to be upset by that, right? And I'm, air quotes here, but I'm not. And I think that it's fair to say that we don't all have the same experiences in life. We view things through a different lens, and we need to acknowledge that the way I view something may be different than the way somebody else does. I referenced the 4th of July, where we talk about independence, and it's safe to say that there's a group of folks in the country that maybe don't view freedom in the same they don't tie it to that day. And I think that's a fair fucking point. And I don't think anyone can, right? Just acknowledge that it's true and move on. You don't have to fight it or anything like that. So I think that that's fair, but we check these boxes off. Okay. So we're your friend. We're every one of them. We're not offended in any way, but can you elaborate, since Trevor and I are not mental health professionals, on some of the things that you are referencing when you say that? And I'll just turn it over to you. So please, Sarah, take the stage.
Absolutely. Right. So I'm white. I have ancestors who can literally be traced back to the Mayflower. And so that is part of my history. And even though I identify, as female and bisexual, certainly have grown up with a lot of these ideas. And when I talk about, right, sort of interrogating this and understanding this is recognizing in the US, but also because the US and the West is very influential in the world, right? There's a lot of ways in which our ideas have really been spread out and propagated throughout other cultures. And I'm not going to go into the whole history of mental health, because again, that could be its own whole 3-hour podcast.
Right.
But mental health in Western society, European and then American cultures in particular, which I will speak about as that's where I'm from, and I don't want to pretend to be an expert in other cultures' approach to it. But it very much developed in this way, particularly let's say the Industrial Revolution-ish era, as folks were starting to move away from home and go into cities and lose support systems. We started to have people, and we were like, what do we do with people who are unwell? Right. Well, we'll put them in asylums, right? We'll kind of sequester them from normal society because we don't really know what to do with them, right? So we have this long history of sort of pathologizing and othering people who are acting out in any way that we feel is weird or problematic. Even if it's not, violent or aggressive, we just think it's kind of weird, right? And then, as we've moved through times and we've tried to be maybe a little bit more understanding and compassionate, right? And we had Freud and all of his descendants, we started to develop these very particular ideas of mental health that are very grounded in being rational, being reasonable, very individualistic a lot of times, right? I mean, therapy traditionally, right, is you come into my office and there's the two of us, and individually we work on whatever your problem is, and maybe you go to a group. There's group therapy exists, that's true, but that's most people's experience is not so much that, right? They come in and they work one-on-one with somebody, and I try to dig into your brain and see what's going on up there and how do we fix it, and then send you off to be a healthy, productive member of society, right? And that's often how we have conceptualized mental health, right? Is what is normative. And in the West, what is normative has often been defined by men, by straight men, by white men, right? Saying this is what is normal based on their own culture and social norms. And then when you get capitalism in the mix, what is normal and healthy is like, what is productive, right? Are you able to fit into our expectations for someone who can work like a 40-hour work week and conform to society and produce, right? And so folks who can't do that, or who struggle with that, right, or any kind of like disability, mental or physical or otherwise, that becomes a problem that needs to be solved, right? Either through treating them, right? We give you medication, we give you this, that, and the other, or just ignoring, sequestering, disregarding, right? And so when I'm talking about this, I think it's important, right? Homosexuality was so the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual is the book that therapists and mental health folks use to give diagnoses, and that we bill insurance companies, to say like, I am treating you for depression. It falls under this code, so please give me money. And that has really evolved in the last 50, 60, 70 years to be kind of like the Bible of mental health, right? And up until like the 70s, homosexuality was in there as a mental illness, right? I think that's really important that we talk about, right? And that's one example of how we pathologized a behavior, and we said like, that's weird and wrong and bad. And if you are experiencing this, then there's something mentally wrong with you, right?
Right.
And throughout time, right, mental illnesses, like these definitions change. We make them up. We look at symptoms and we say, if you have this cluster of symptoms, you have this diagnosis, right? We don't really have a lot of like, there's no blood test I can give you to say that you're depressed, right? You say I have this, that, and the other, you are depressed, right? But throughout history, throughout time, we have given people diagnoses based on what is happening in the society and the culture, and said like, that behavior is wrong, right? There were certain diagnoses that were given to slaves who were running away. We said that's a mental illness. If you are running away, there's something mentally wrong with you, because you shouldn't be, right? Because that's not
as a slave.
Yeah. Slaves who ran away
Wow.
were given a mental illness diagnosis, right?
What is wrong with you for running away from this pleasureful place we have here for you?
Say that is a normal human response to mistreatment and abuse and being forced to work and live under terrible conditions, is you want to run away. We want to leave. But because of our racist ideas, we need to justify slavery, right? We had to say like, well, a good, happy slave, perfectly content to be there, and the ones who run away, there's something mentally wrong with them, right? That's a problem.
That is,
it's weird that that's a mental illness, that they thought it was a mental illness as they were writing that the pursuit of happiness is a fundamental, like, right to everyone.
Well,
so interesting.
Except for you folks.
Right.
Except for you who are only considered 1/3 of a person for the reason that I want your vote when I vote. But other than that, you're not a person at all.
Exactly.
We're going to have to research that.
Right?
We're not going to take your word that a white male wrote that diagnosis. It could have been anyone. It could have been anyone. Wow, I never knew that. That's an interesting one. Wow,
yeah,
yes.
People don't, right?
That's a great example.
Right? It's the 19th century, but yeah, because we had to figure out a way to label behavior that didn't fit into our social worldview, right? The worldview was, yeah, slaves should be happy. They should be great. We took them out of Africa. We introduced them to Christianity in a lot of cases. So if they're not going along with the program, it can't possibly be that the system is wrong. They have to be wrong, right? As individuals.
Yeah, of course.
Right?
Oh, goodness. Some people just can't fall in line. I don't understand. Such a great environment.
I've tried to get them in line with my whip, but they just don't understand.
3 squares a day in a room.
Right,
it's funny. The arrogance behind all of that is so really not funny, but funny. It's just like something wrong with that guy. There's got to be. I don't know what to say next. It's got to be like in history, some people that were like, this shit is not cool. Like none of this makes sense. but I'm just going to go along with the norm, right? They probably had to, because I feel like if I was against slavery, like people would be like, "What's wrong with you, man? What do you mean?" It's like, it just doesn't seem right. Like, yeah, but like you'd almost be vilified for not agreeing with that being the best thing on earth, right? And I guess it is the best thing on earth when production and having crops and things, right, to be able to produce so I can make money. Wow. I'm learning. Look, this is a learning session. That's a good example. Is there another one? Because that's a really disturbing one. I'm sure you could name them all. My goodness.
There's a lot of them, unfortunately. So that's a good example, I think, when we think about slavery, right? If we take it back to Freud and we think about hysteria. So one of the things I find fascinating about Freud is when he started his work, he was like, oh wow, it seems like women are really experiencing a lot of sexual abuse. That's kind of messed up. But he was in Vienna in the 19th century, and so talking about sexual abuse that may have been happening in the homes of, middle class families was not acceptable, right? We can't point out that there is sexual abuse, right? That there's incest, that there's bad things happening. And so his early writings talk about this, and then over time it transforms into like, oh, this isn't a real thing. When women talk about their dads, this is like a fantasy, right? Like the Oedipal complex, right? Men and women are having these fantasies about wanting to have relationships with their parents, but it's really just, about like love and attachment and the sexual drive and all of that. Like it's not real. Right. And so when women would show up and they got these diagnoses of hysteria, right, and they would show up in like physical symptoms, right, they would have like malaise, or they would be maybe like acting out in these ways that seemed inappropriate. Well, this is a fantasy that they're experiencing, and it's coming out this way, and they need to go to therapy and get sorted out. But we called it hysteria because we didn't know how to like acknowledge or address that. Like maybe there's
just a very vague term, right? They're in
right.
hysterics.
It's very vague, right? They're hysterics, which comes from Greek, because it was the Greek idea was that women who were upset was because their womb, their uterus had gotten disconnected from their body and was wandering around their body.
Is that where like hysterectomy, hysterics? Is that
yes,
are they
exactly.
connected?
Yeah,
really?
They're all connected from the Greek. I think it means like uterus.
Oh my god!
Yeah,
wow.
Right. So it's this
Holy
very
shit.
female diagnosis, right, based on this idea that your womb was dysregulated. And by Freud's time they didn't think the womb was like wandering your body, but we did think it was something like uniquely feminine, right, like something, those crazy women, without actually going back and being like, maybe there's a reason that women in like this sort of puritanical 19th century culture where they can't like express themselves or like get an education or work, and maybe are experiencing sexual abuse like at home or with their partners or whatever's happening there. Like maybe that's what's underlying some of these behaviors and these emotions that are coming out. No. They're crazy, they're unwell, they're weak, right? And so that's the problem. Right? We don't diagnose women with hysteria anymore, as a general rule.
Yes.
Although
rule of thumb here.
The term still exists, right? So, we certainly still describe women as hysterical if they're acting, emotional or
right? You're acting hysterical right now. I mean, you know what? But then where'd funny come from? Oh, that shit's hysterical. So hysterical is funny, can be male. And now that I think about it, I've never heard of anyone that I can think of in my head right now refer to a man as acting hysterical. I do feel like it is always applied. Listen, she's acting hysterical right now. Where a guy you might say is being a fucking asshole or something like that. She's crying hysterically. Maybe a baby will be hysterical. Mm-hmm. Boy or girl. Wow.
Right.
Look at this. I was trying to battle you on these topics, and I'm sitting here agreeing with every one of them.
Yeah.
Wow. We were always learning at the Paddy Wagon. Goodness gracious.
Right?
Real quick, one question.
Yeah.
kind of stepping back to the health and wellness overall, just a quick yes or no. Do we fucking seriously address mental health at this point in this country? I feel like we're trying to, I know we're trying to be better about it right now. Getting people on board, I feel, is probably still a little behind. But am I wrong to just say that insurance is a crock of shit? Western medicine a lot of the times is a crock of shit, and that they just throw a fucking prescription of Xanax at everybody anymore and call it a fucking day, versus let's sit down and talk about maybe why you want to do these things to yourself, or why you want to hurt yourself or hurt other people. I'm not crazy to think that.
No.
Okay.
No, I don't think you're crazy. I really don't. And so that gets to what I'm talking about, right? Which is this idea that, like, if we say that we can just give you this diagnosis and say that something is wrong with you, well, then this is how we're going to fix what's wrong with you, right? And so that's going to be, and then in our culture, right, in our economy, how can we fix what's wrong with you in like the cheapest way possible? And so you can take a diagnosis, you can take an antidepressant, you can take an anti-anxiety medication. And listen, I have ADHD and I take an ADHD medication and it does help me. And I am not here to say that medication is useless, and it has helped a lot of folks.
And I will clarify that and say the same thing. I will say that, right? I know medication helps, but I also think it's abused by a lot of doctors to say, here, just take this and you'll be fine.
Absolutely, right? I think it's highly problematic that a lot of times, right, it becomes just something that we can like take it and then you're going to feel better. And a lot of times what it winds up doing is, even if it helps, sometimes it's masking symptoms. It's actually disconnecting us from like what's actually wrong. You know, if you're feeling depressed, I don't want people to feel suicidally depressed, of course.
It's a fair request.
And I also want to see, like, can we get to what is going on, right? Why are we feeling depressed? Well, I feel depressed because I hate myself, because from the age of, childhood, I've been told that I'm like a terrible person and everybody hates me. Well, I think that's important to talk about, and no medication is going to fix that. Right. And so that's the problem, right? That is the problem that I think, is that when we decide these behaviors are normative, these behaviors are not, based on what we as a culture view as like normal and healthy, and historically that has been straight white men. So anyone who's acting outside of those norms, we diagnose, we give you a prescription that's really easy. One of the things I'm seeing in my field now is ketamine is becoming very common as a treatment intervention. So, ketamine it was developed as a, what's the word I'm looking for? Like an
Is it tranquilizer?
Right?
Is that the one that was the tranquilizer?
It's a tranquilizer. But we found that it was really helpful for some folks who had treatment-resistant depression. And we were like, because it kind of seems to do something where it helps connect parts of the brain. If used like, an appropriate, like supervised way and all of that, it seems to help connect parts of the brain that were otherwise not really connected. And so great, cool, love it. If that's going to help someone who otherwise is like deeply depressed and can't get out of bed, great. But then the problem becomes, right, because you can make a decent amount of money off of it, it starts to get applied to everything. So then people are like, oh, I can go get a ketamine treatment and that's going to solve my trauma, right?
Yeah.
It's not going to magically solve anything. It can mask it, absolutely. But if we're not doing that work to kind of understand like what's going on and what happened there, and like, I know that's hard, and like sometimes it can take a really long time and it can take years, right? And insurance companies don't want to hear that, but it's true. There's no quick fix. And that
we get into this thing of treating the symptom and not the cause. And then as you're treating the symptoms are never going to go away, right, because we're not addressing the root cause of the issue.
Exactly. And that's really what's frustrating.
What's the drug that is for diabetes that also aids in weight loss? And yes, and now they give it to everybody, and now there's a shortage. So now there's a bunch of people with diabetes that can't get medicine because other people are using it for weight loss.
Right.
Fuck you. Whoever's listening to this that had a role in that horse shit. And nobody, like, you'll hear some people talk about it, but for some reason, you never hear anyone write about it. You never see it written down. You never see anybody question, why are we doing this? Because it's fucking awful. It's absolutely awful that, and again, because can we regulate diet? Can we try to get to the root cause of maybe eating healthier? And again, that's a whole another 3-hour conversation about how, food and eating properly, we're not educated on how to do so. We don't have the resources to do so. The majority of food you buy anymore is shit. I can't buy. I mean, I'm buying groceries are being delivered to my house rotten. But yet we'll throw scarred tomatoes in the garbage because they don't look pretty, and I can't have this on our supermarket shelf. So we'll dump all this good food into the trash, and I am now eating rotten grapes that probably a week ago were perfectly round. It's very frustrating to know that there's hungry people out there, and again, like that could be another 3-hour episode. But again, the same thing is that we're not addressing the problem a lot of the times.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And that's, it's hard. It takes hard work. It takes a lot of willingness to confront things that are maybe upsetting and that maybe point to some issues in society. Right. So again, if we talk about things, race, gender, sexuality and stuff, like, I have to talk about homophobia, right? When I'm talking to a queer client, maybe who's struggling with the ways in which that impacted them growing up, right? Or if I'm working with an immigrant client, we have to talk about the ways in which like racism has impacted them or impacted their family and the way in which folks react to them or they move through the world. I can't ignore that. I think that's really important because that's part of our mental health, right? These larger systems, I'm not going to fix it in the therapy room, but I have to at least be acknowledging it and being willing to say, like, we have to look at all these big pieces. I can't just like have you come in for like 12 sessions and like address the symptoms and tell you to like take a bubble bath and then like you're going to be good to go. Because this stuff's really deep and we really need to be, looking at it, understanding it. At a much deeper level than a lot of times we want to.
When they're all interconnected. So if you would have an immigrant who did not ever experience racism, then they can go, well, I've not experienced any of that. That's horseshit. And then the other people go, no, I experienced it. It's real. And then they're arguing with each other. Well, you're not fitting into the group. And then you go back to that herd mentality in the group. You have to fit into this group because me and you have the same color skin. We experience racism. Well, yes, we may as a group, but I haven't. And we just don't get to talk to people and say, what are your experiences like? Because it may vary from the group. I have a rule, no politics, but my rule is, if you want to ask me a question, ask me very specifically what your question is. Don't go, hey, are you a Republican or a Democrat? I'm like, that's not going to be answered. You can ask me a specific question related to a specific topic, and I will give you my answer, maybe, if I feel like talking about it. Because, again, human beings are not left, right, or this bucket or that bucket. We have different things about us that fall onto both sides of the fence. And that's good. That's the way it should be. I love having conversations with people. It doesn't even have to be political. Just if you have a different approach or you flat out disagree with something I think, I'm so interested in having a conversation with that person. And it makes me better. And hopefully it makes them better. And you're like, oh, okay, well now I realize that I can get along with people that feel differently and think differently. Oh my.
Oh man. So I know we've been talking for a while now and it's going a little long, but like I say, there's a couple more things I want to get to before we do end. When like I said, Mike Hennigoes, he finds the people we talk to and then he tells me about them and we discuss and we did talk about, okay, is this Somewhere in Hell on show? And he was telling me about you. And when he was telling me about your specialties and what you do for therapy, I started thinking about things and I went down my own little rabbit hole. And then we've kind of touched on a little bit of it. So I'm going to throw it back to some of the things we've talked about as we've gone through, this whole discussion we've had. So you specialize in neurodiversity. And you had said that you were late diagnosed with ADHD. And I probably fit into that category. I've never been officially diagnosed with ADHD, but probably as we've been talking, you knows my eyes dart here and dart there, and I'm looking over here and I'm doing this, and I'm doing that. And all these tons of things that my mind is going 100 different places in 100 different ways. And then also the fact that the whole time we've been talking, when we started this episode, I found, I'm gonna hold it up right now, a watch band on my desk. The whole time we've been talking, I've been sitting here just playing with this in my hand. And every time people talk about the different symptoms, ADHD and the different, and like I said, when we talked about it earlier, or when you were describing neurodiversity, you had kind of said that some people consider this a neurodiversity, some people it's just already, it's just something where you're born with, and it's not in that. So I guess, like I said, probably something, I don't know, that I don't think it affects my wife, I guess, enough where I want to go officially be diagnosed with it. Would it be beneficial? I don't know.
Yeah, I think any type of diagnosis is really up to the person and whether you think it would be beneficial to you or not. I think for me, what really happened was, for many of us, I think 2020, 2021, that period of time where we were, home and, kind of trapped in our homes, it was challenging for folks in a lot of different ways, right? And for me, I realized that I was working. I was still working at my job, my previous job. And so I was working, but everything had fallen apart, right? All my structures had fallen apart. And I remember I said to people in my life, I was like, I am missing structure and I am missing stimulation. And those two things were really, for years, actually, my husband had been saying to me, like, I think you might have ADHD. And I was like, no, I don't. And those two things, right? Realizing that I was having I could not provide myself the structure I needed with just endless time. Yeah. And I could not figure out how to stimulate myself again, just in my New York City apartment. I was like, I think there's something here. I think I need to figure this out. And so for me, getting diagnosed and starting medication was helpful, but it was also really helpful just to learn about it and start to hear other folks' experiences and understand how it could show up. So I could learn to be friendlier with my own brain and figure out, not as an excuse, I still have to do things. This is terrible as a therapist to admit, but I have, once in a while, double booked a client or forgotten that I scheduled a session with somebody because I wrote it down, but then my brain just forgot. And I take ownership of that, right? So I have to put structures in place to help myself do my job and do the things that I have to do. And the fact that sometimes I cannot motivate myself to, put my clothes away for 3 days, I'm not going to sit here and beat myself up about it and be like, oh my God, I'm a terrible person. Who cares? You know what? That's what my brain needs. Or maybe my brain needs to just do nothing for 5 hours because that's how it's going to reset from everything else that is coming up. And then I can do the other things that I have to do. Do you know what I mean? So for me, it's about making friends with my brain instead of just getting caught up in cycles of shame and guilt and self-punishment, because that's not helpful.
Yes.
So if that helps, right? If this resonates with folks and that helps, whether it's a formal diagnosis or not, and you can have a better relationship with how you move through the world, at the end of the day, that's what's most important.
And like you said, realizing why you go through those times of where you are forgetting things or you're putting this off, or and then also recognizing the times of, my wife gets on me all the time about going through just episodes of hyper focus.
Oh, sure.
Where it's this topic is something I am going to be all over for the next, 20 days. But then after that 20 days, that topic is so gone and I'm not even worried about it anymore. And I'm on to something else. And, or just certain days, she'll some days in doing this or that or, whatever. And that's what my mind means to be. But then other days she comes home and she's like, you just reorganized the house. You cleaned, you started doing plaster and sanding and you're working on this and working on the house is you did all these things. And I'm yeah, I did. Yeah. There was just a day of that was my focus today was the house and getting that done. But then, so also what came up when I was going down my rabbit hole of when Mike was telling me about you is the term of ADHD. And you had talked about earlier that diagnoses changed and things in like the book, like I don't remember the name of the book you were talking about now. I can't think of the medical journal.
Manual, the DSM. Yeah.
The DSM. Okay. So I was thinking about it, and a long time ago, ADHD wasn't so much thing. It was ADP, right? And then ADHD came along, and then there was both. You could have ADD or again ADHD. And I feel like now you never hear about just ADD anymore. Everything it's ADHD. Has the diagnosis of just attention deficit disorder gone away, and it is now just all classified as attention deficit hyperactive disorder?
Yep, it's all subsumed. Yes. Again, we make it up as we get more information or things seem to resonate more. It's all subsumed now under ADHD because there seems to be some hyperactive component, I guess. I would ideally like one day a definition that's a little bit less pathologizing, because I think to your point about the hyperfocus, I think it's less attention deficit, and I think it's more those differences in attention, right? And so it can be really challenging to like there's a lot we say about it, but the point is, I think I would like it to focus more on like the difference in attention rather than just pathologizing it as like attention deficit. Because if I'm bored, I'm probably not paying attention, but if I'm interested, I am locked in, right?
Yes,
and to
absolutely.
me, that's not a deficit, that's just a difference, and that's, I think, more a better way to approach it. But we don't, it's all one diagnosis now.
Real talk, I just diagnosed myself. I have it. I'm listening to you two go back and forth, and I've always thought like I have this brain fog thing going on, and I attribute it. I know for a fact that it started with COVID. It's coincidental, maybe. Is it not? Maybe. I don't know. But I do have this lack of focus in so many areas, and I'm very forgetful now with certain things. Word recognition, word recall. Can't think of that last name or the first name or the name of the movie. And my memory has been spot on for my entire life. And then like right now, I'll just go, oh, wait, I forget what I was talking about. Like I do that all the time. And I do wonder if maybe I have a little bit of that. And maybe the brain fog is in fact some sort of attention, like it's an attention deficit disorder or something, because I am laser focused on the podcast stuff now. Mm-hmm. It's not going to say consuming, but it's like it's fun, it's enjoyable. I like it. It's like let's like all in, and it will continue. I know that because I have fun with it. But it's as I'm listening to you talk, I'm like, oh man, I may be right there in this group. Interesting.
Yeah, right.
And then you and I feel like Micah and I have talked about at different times that. Like he says, like you talk earlier that I'm quiet. I don't talk a lot, right? But I would say more that I don't talk a lot until you get me on a subject that I am very interested in, and then I don't shut up.
Mm-hmm.
I will talk continually about this, and I will, like Mike's saying about the podcast, where everyone at work and my job, like 5:30, they are running out the door. This girl mentioned to me yesterday, she brought up our podcast and talking about the episode she had just listened to, and 5:30, and it was like 5:28 or something. I ended up seeing her just like talking, and she probably hardly got a word in as I was just talking about our podcast to her till almost 6 o'clock. And I'm like, oh, we should probably go.
Yeah, I've been there. It's something I really struggle with, especially as a therapist. Sometimes I can like get off and I'm like, "Whoa, this is your session. Let me stop talking."
I was just going to say that. Wait, but this is about you, not me.
Hold on.
Really
wait a second.
Gotta check myself.
All right. Well, like I said, we've been talking for a while, and I've just been enjoying our conversation so much. It's been so fun. I do want to end on a bit of a good note here. So just two more things before we leave. I'm a fan of being just loving and kind to people, and compassion and kindness breaks through barriers that, whether it's like Mike was saying about talking to people that are going through this trauma or having this and just being kind and talking to them. And then they can cause them to open up to you about that. Or even in my job, people come in so angry and upset about something that happened, and they sit down and they want to yell and be mad. And then if I'm just kind to them and I talk to them and just kill it with kindness, a lot of times they calm down, and then we could have an honest conversation just based off of that kindness, and we can connect. But what is something you think that all people can be better with, and something that you at a therapist you see all the time on what and are just, I guess, yeah, I'm going to leave it at that. I'm not going to go into more.
I love it. Yes, I think kindness is definitely something we could all work on. So I'm really glad to hear you say that. So I am a television fan in addition to a Broadway fan. And one of my favorite shows is Ted Lasso.
I knew it was coming. Knew it was coming.
Yes.
Knew it was coming.
Right?
Yes. Believe.
And right, exactly. And but truly, I really, in the first season, he has this quote about being curious, not judgmental.
Yeah.
And I love it because I really think that is so we could all use so much more of that, right? Judgment is so easy, and we just label folks and we're like, oh, that guy's such an asshole, right? But we take that step back and be like, what's going on with them? Why are they showing up with this kind of energy? Right? Like maybe we can't, right? Maybe we have a job where we can talk to folks and help, but maybe we're not always in that position. But we can still have some curiosity. It's like, I wonder what that guy's having a bad day. And I don't need to take it personally. Yeah. And I can take that step back, right? So, be a little bit more like Ted. Be curious, not judgmental.
Yep. Very good.
Sarah, do you play a lot of darts?
No, the one time I'm not a terribly athletic person, so the one time I tried, I was just like,
well, if you were curious, you would have asked me if I played every Sunday from 10 to 16 with my dad.
That's right. Exactly.
That's great. Well, so let's end this thing. I will tell you this one question. I'm out. Well, this is not a question, it's a statement. I am out of my rye, and I don't know how everyone else's drinks are doing, but Sarah,
me as well.
Empty.
Your work, I know you had I believe it was a nonprofit. Is there anything that you would like to bring awareness to? Anything that you would like to say to people out there, whether they're maybe seeking some answers, seeking somebody to talk to, any resources, or just anything in general that you would like to get the name out there for people?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well, first of all, if you want to know anything more about me, you can find me online. My website is saraeldridgelcsw.com. So that's Sarah with an A, and Eldridge, ELDRIDGE. So you can find me and get in contact with me. So I work for this great organization called Minding Your Mind, where I'm a clinical educator. So like I mentioned, we go to schools and we talk to parents. We also talk to corporate groups about mental health. So if that's something that you have any interest in, look them up. Thanks to the magic of the internet, we can do a lot of stuff virtually, as well as, since I'm in New York, I do stuff in person, which is really fun. And then I think in general, listen, mental health help is out there, and I know that it can be really hard, right? And I said before we jumped on the podcast that one of the reasons I like coming onto podcasts is I like talking to folks who are not therapists, because I think sometimes I love other therapists, but I think sometimes we get a little bit in our own minds, and we have all these specialties and all these acronyms, and we know what we're talking about, but people don't necessarily know what we're talking about, right? So I would encourage anyone out there who thinks that they might benefit from seeking mental health help, look for someone who you feel like you resonate with, who is going to be curious with you and not judgmental, right? You feel that there's compassion, you feel there's understanding, and you feel that the approach works for them, right? Works for you. Not every therapeutic approach is going to work for everyone, right? Obviously, I'm coming from this trauma approach, and I want to dive deep and get in there and be like, what is going on? And not everybody likes that, right? So sometimes you want that CBT therapist who's just going to help you figure out how to stop this behavior. And that's fine. Great. figure out what you want, what you need. I know this is a terrible advice. You're gonna be like, Sarah, are you saying I have to like try like 10 therapists to find the one that I like? No, but you can reach out to folks, do a consultation, be like, hey, what's your approach? Give it a try once or twice, see if it works for you, move on to someone else, right? But I truly believe that there is help out there if that's something that you're interested in. Right. So I really want to encourage folks to not give up, even if you maybe don't have like the greatest experience with the first therapist that you see, or even the second or third. You kind of have to be willing to like put yourself out there and really think about what you need and what feels helpful for you. And if it's not working, then just stop and find somebody else. Right. So that's kind of just my general mental health advice that I will offer and put out there.
It's a relationships. I've said this, and I don't know if I came up with this, but I think that I did. And I was talking to my kids about something. It's like shoes. They don't all fit. And sometimes you have to try on a bunch of different pairs. And eventually when you try the pair on that fits and it feels good and you're comfortable, good things happen. So just keep trying on shoes and you'll eventually find one that fits, whether it's a relationship, therapist, whatever it is. There's answers out there. It helps a lot of people. And again, don't give up after the first one, which is what you're saying. So couldn't agree more.
Exactly.
Awesome.
Excellent.
Well, thank you so much for joining. And
of
like
course,
I said,
thank you for having me.
Yes,
happy to chat and have a drink.
Thank you for coming on and having a drink and talking with us.
You're so
We
welcome.
appreciate it. And I'm sure everyone that is listening is going to appreciate it. This was, like I said, we had so much fun today. And thank you for coming on.
Absolutely.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Cheers, everyone.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
You're
Bye, folks.
leading me astray over hills and mountains and to America. You're sweeter, stronger, decenter. You're spunkier nor tay. Oh, whiskey, you're me darling drunker soul.